Greetings all! Today, we'll be examining the common bug-type Pokemon Caterpie, the Worm Pokémon, its relatively uncommon evolution Metapod, the Cocoon Pokémon, and their final uncommon bug-flying type evolution Butterfree, the Butterfly Pokémon. While they certainly might start out as some of the weakest of creatures out there, the members of the Caterpie family can still expedite this and make themselves into threatening adults in relatively little time. Caterpie have small, segmented green bodies with a segmented beige underbelly and tail tip, having a series of beige circular marks on the sides of each of the segments, as well as a small, rounder mouth that helps to hide the extremely small black eyes. They have 4 tiny beige limbs that they use for locomotion, black eye spots on the side of the head with beige rings around them, and a red Y-shaped one they use for defensive measures. Their evolved form Metapod have bodies that are entirely encapsulated in a thick green crescent moon-shaped cocoon that protects the insides of the creature as they change and evolve into adults over time. The only other noticeable feature on their bodies in this state is the pair of photoreceptors on the sides of their head with a black setter and white sclera that they use to observe the surrounding environment. The final evolution Butterfree have purple bodies and heads with a pair of long elongated blue feet, a small pair of 3-clawed arms in their torso, a small mouth the same color with protruding canines, long black antennae, and a pair of large multifaceted red eyes. The most noteworthy feature though are the large wings, which are typically covered in bright white scales with black trim and black veins along their form, with females further having a noticeable pair of identical black marks on the lower ends of each of their wings. Lastly, it is known that Butterfree have access to a Gigantamax form, and in this state, the wings of these creatures become much larger in size and take on a blindingly bright green glow, created as Dynamax energy crystallizes on their toxic scales and in puffy nodules at the base of their wings. As with traditional caterpillars, Caterpie spend the vast majority of their life simply foraging for food and avoiding predators. Caterpie are literal eating machines that could easily devour leaves much bigger than themselves within a few short seconds. In some cases, a Caterpie may even end up eating more than its weight in leaves, or up to 100 leaves within a single day. As Caterpie grow and develop over time, they will gradually begin to shed their skin and leave it outside in the open. Aside from acting as distractions for predatory birds that are otherwise unwise to the skin's actual contents, these discarded exoskeletons also provide the local soil a considerable amount of nutrition once they begin to decompose, in turn fertilizing the ground that grants Caterpie the single source of sustenance. Unfortunately for Caterpie, their weak, soft bodies do not offer much in the way of self-defense, so they must often climb trees with small suction pads on the tips of their legs in order to find food that is both plentiful and relatively safe to eat out in the open. Once Caterpie grow to a certain size and acquire enough energy to undergo metamorphosis, they spray their entire bodies with the string shot technique until they manage to cover their forms in a thick layer of hardened string, effectively turning them into Metapod. While in this state, Caterpie are unable to move, as the tender bodies are mostly melted into a thick liquid, the cells inside slowly changing within the cocoon into those of their adult form's body. They can, however, still see and hear due to a thin layer of membrane on the inside of their shells that acts as both a photoreceptor, in turn looking like a pair of eyes, and a receiver for sound vibrations. Since there is effectively nothing connecting the muscles to the inside of the shells, however, nor anything to anchor their insides in place and keep them from spilling out, most Metapod are completely and utterly immobile and must rely on their durable shells for protection against all assaults, which helps to explain why their base attack stat slightly decreases when they evolve into this evolutionary state. This generally works surprisingly well though, primarily thanks to the harden technique which they acquire immediately after evolution. Without any modifications, the layer of hardened string covering the bodies of the developing Caterpie is practically as hard and durable as a steel slab, though it is still somewhat soft and vulnerable to damage within the first hour formation, and has been known to still break in intense battles, making it very difficult for predators to penetrate the shell without sharp claws or beaks. If Metapod wish to, however, they can actually spray a tiny amount of extra string over their cocoons through tiny pores in the shell exterior. This hardened technique is notably different from others in that it can be executed almost instantly and indefinitely, slowly turning a single Metapod into a creature that even a pincer can't crack open at full strength. It is duly noted, however, that piercing weapons like the large stingers on Beedrill are still able to cleave through the thick shells relatively easily due to their rather fibrous construction, and sudden shock to the outside of the shell, like being violently tipped over, can cause the premature Butterfree on the inside to be ejected, oftentimes leading to death if they are more than a day away from normal maturation. Butterfree, which require a partial flying type assignment evolution, are slightly unique in comparison to most other butterflies, in that they can actually produce honey in the same fashion as bees and use it for a very similar purpose: food. Butterfree possess extremely sensitive sensory nerves on the inside of their head and are capable of detecting the odors of a blooming flower from over 6 miles away, even if the source is literally only a single flower. Once they find a flower, they quickly use the fine hairs on the disproportionately large legs to gather all of the pollen from the flower before slurping up its nectar with their small mouths. When they manage to return to the nest, Butterfree will mix the pollen and nectar together along with their saliva to produce a semi-sweet, low-viscosity honey. The low viscosity and slightly bland taste of this honey make it somewhat unpopular among other life forms in comparison to the honey made by bee-drilled or even regular bees, which seems to work out fine for Butterfree in that it ensures that thievery is their last concern. While both Butterfree and newly hatched Caterpie will feast on this honey, Caterpie eventually lose interest in the honey and begin eating leaves at least 3 days after they are born. Butterfree, on the other hand, eat nothing but the home-brewed honey, and thus the honey depend upon the local flower population for survival. As such, it is relatively rare to see Butterfree within a given area during the winter, as it will almost always fly south with local birds when cold weather begins to show up. It is further noted that the type of plant the honey is formed from can affect the color palette of feeding Caterpie as they grow and mature, leading to genetic abnormalities that can alter their dull pigmentation. The most prominent example of this is the pink Butterfree, a rare mutation that occurs only in certain parts of the Kanto region. As far as their abilities are concerned, these creatures differ widely depending upon what stage of life they are actually in. As Caterpie, they naturally produce a special power that covers their bodies to help keep them safe from natural toxins, giving them access to shield dust as a base ability, but those that are extremely skittish towards others can also have access to run away as a hidden ability. Due to the inability to actually move much and their extremely hard layered shell, Metapod only have access to shed skin as an ability. Lastly, Butterfree are able to use their strong, multifaceted eyes to see clearly at many different angles to help them really track the movement of others, giving them compound eyes as a base ability, while those able to more effectively combine the natural traits of the wing scales and the natural special powers to help bypass enemy defenses to deal more effective damage than normal can have access to Tinted Lens as a hidden ability. As far as the stats are concerned, Butterfree suffer from relatively weak base stats as a result of the rapid maturation cycle, and thus might not have much to offer trainers in the long run, but at the very least they do have potent special attributes for what they are, the base special attack and special defense stats being above average for fully evolved bug and flying type Pokemon, so they can still deliver a decent punch with their special attacks and take them decently well before falling in a battle. Unlike their contemporary Weedle, Caterpie cannot utilize poison to attack opponents and must instead rely on a fairly weak tackle attack to do any real damage before evolution. If Caterpie are threatened by a predator, however, offense is rarely the first instinct and is instead swapped out for defensive tactics. When threatened, Caterpie will first attempt to hide themselves among leaves that are similar in color to their own skin. Oddly enough, this simple camouflage actually works quite a bit of the time, even against experienced predatory birds. If that fails, Caterpie will attempt to frighten off the opposition with the eye spots on the side of the body. This only works against fairly young predators, but it nonetheless can work well in the right circumstances. If worst comes to worst, and an opponent gets really close to them, however, Caterpie will use a potent secret weapon to drive back predators in hordes. A terrible smell. When threatened in close quarters, Caterpie will release a potent stench from the red antenna on their heads. Despite their small size, this smell is quite terrible and can actually remain in the noses of all who smell it for several hours at a time, continuously burning the sense of insight to the nostrils for the entire duration. With these primary defensive tactics at hand, in addition to their popular string shot technique, it comes as a little surprise that Caterpie managed to exist in high numbers in the wild despite a lack of poison for defense, though this does not mean that their best defenses are capable of driving off stronger predators very often. While they might share much in common with their contemporary Kakuna, Metapod have a noble advantage in that they actually can be taught to move. While Kakuna inherit their pre-evolved form's poison sting attack without any issues, Metapod are normally unable to do much other than simply wait around for evolution. If due diligence taken in training them to use their muscles as much as possible while developing, however, the Caterpie inside of Metapod can be taught to suddenly flex what muscles they have left in their shells, generating a similar effect to what is seen in Mexican jumping beans. While this makeshift tackle attack might not be exceptionally powerful, if performed from a branch or another place high off the ground, the damage potential can be heavily intensified to the point where it can even crack weak armor in extreme cases. More importantly, Metapod can be taught to use similarly colored leaves in a forest environment to their advantage in battle, much as Caterpie, in using them to hide from predators. The only real catch is that Metapod cannot release a stench if suddenly revealed or scared by another, so if they are snuck up on, they have to rely on a tackle attack to make enough room for a quick escape. Unlike their pre-evolved forms, Butterfree rarely ever have to worry about being attacked by predators, primarily thanks to the toxic scales attached to their wings, aside from frequent territorial skirmishes with Pokemon like Caterpie in the Lola region, though the advanced motion detecting capabilities of their compound eyes also help somewhat. Although Butterfree are able to use some psychic type attacks in battle, these are usually only attacks of last resort and are almost always preceded by a status inflicting technique, as Butterfree are not exactly the strongest of fighters. Much as with Venomoth, the wings of Butterfree are coated with toxic scales that easily flake off when shaken with enough force, such as through a flapping motion, which also grants Butterfree access to the gust attack upon evolving. Once released, these scales can quickly be inhaled into opponents' lungs and absorbed into the bloodstream, resulting in the infliction of a variety of status conditions. While Butterfree gained access to the classic poison powder, stun spore, and sleep powder techniques fairly early on, they could also learn to generate more unique toxic powders as they aged, eventually learning moves like Silver Wind and Rage Powder. Outside battle, these toxic scales also grant Butterfree a particularly unique ability that actually makes them effective against water types, and an ability to have wet wings. The layer of scales that coat the wings of Butterfree acts surprisingly well as a natural watertight sealant, essentially preventing water from ever touching the actual surface of the wing membranes. This has proven to be a useful survival mechanism during the rainy season of spring, as it allows Butterfree to freely fly and hunt for flower pollen and nectar even in pouring rain. Lastly, it is known that Butterfree is also one of only a select number of Pokemon capable of undergoing the process of Gigantamaxing, with specific members of the species taking on a unique form when they are Dynamaxed in battle. In this state, the immense power that flows through them allows these creatures to generate immensely powerful tornadoes with their wings that could send 10-ton trucks flying, often using this power to trap opponents before dousing them in their poisonous scales to finish them off. While this might only be a temporary state for them, they can use this power to great effect in battle through the unique G-Max move known as G-Max Befuddle, which operates almost identically to the normal Max Flutterby attack, but adds in the now immensely toxic powder to guarantee that it will inflict a nasty status condition on the target in addition to damage, allowing these monsters to use their Dynamax power to the fullest and leave little but physically weakened and sick Pokemon in the wake once their transformation ends.
These critters are easily some of the cutest of bug-type Pokemon out there, and I'd say that only those with a totally irrational fear of insectoids would have a reason to even be remotely afraid of them. Caterpie are sweet little gals and fellas that just enjoy spending their days hiding around and feeding on leaves. They might not have much more than a tackle to defend themselves with, but given they tend to be generated in mass numbers, they can still propagate with little trouble. Metapod may only be able to harden in the wild, and thus have little issue, but getting through the thick cocoon of theirs isn't always so easy. The fact that some can even still tackle others from this state is impressive and worth noting for battle-raised specimens. Butterfree are both adorable and majestic in their forms, their lovely white wings and bright purple bodies standing out strongly from their surroundings. Just don't get too close to them if they don't see you as a friend or a non-threat of some sort, as the toxic powders and psychic abilities at their disposal can still be more than enough to catch others off guard if they aren't ready to handle all of that.
While they might not have the sheer power that other Pokemon families possess, the members of the Caterpie family are still noble beasts for young trainers to take advantage of for the simple combat abilities and the capacity to reach adulthood faster than other types of Pokemon. This may come with a trade-off of weaker powers as a fully evolved Pokemon, but this does little to take away from the power they can still wield against others in battle. Just do yourself a favor and make sure you give them plenty of space when they're fully evolved. They might be kind-hearted compared to Pokemon like Beedrill, but that doesn't mean that you won't get caught in the crossfire if they decide to flap the wings really hard to litter the battlefield in status effect inducing toxic dust in defense. Thank you all for watching this video. It is a great pleasure to share with you all the fruits of my research and all the positives it gives to understanding the wonderful creatures we call Pokemon and how their powers and behaviors function in their world. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more work like it, please give a like, comment, and or subscribe to the channel so you can get regular notifications on when new content is being uploaded. You can also find links to my DeviantArt page, Patreon, and Discord server in the description below. Please, join me on this road to seeing what the world of Pokemon has to share with us, and the many mysteries and wonders that keep us all coming back for more.